change the future. And you change the past.
Are you in?
Happy New Year, everyone. I've gotten a lot of requests to do a video about the Flash movie rebooting the DCEU, the Justice League, so I'll explain what's going on with that because I think some of the details are getting mixed up in translation. But if you're brand new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get all the videos. There's a bunch of big DC stuff, DC movies happening this year. Like the Batman movie with Robert Pattinson is the next big movie we're getting in March. Speaking of the multiverse, because the Flash movie is kind of like their first major multiverse movie, even though Crisis on Infinite Earths with the DC TV shows kind of already gave us a version of multiverse with Ezra Miller's Justice League Flash crossing over with Grant Gustin's DC TV Flash, but you've probably seen people in your timelines talking about a report that's been circulating about the Flash movie going full Flashpoint way more than we originally thought. A couple years ago, after the big debacle with the Justice League theatrical version, I joked that they should just use the Flash movie to reboot everything so they could pretend like that theatrical version never happened. Now, we did get the Snyder cut, which kind of replaces the theatrical cut, but it does sound like the actual Flash movie we're getting later this year has a plan to soft reboot or retune some of the elements and the characters in the DCEU. I think some of the details about this quote-unquote reboot are a little exaggerated, but I'll try to explain what's going on just based on what Ezra Miller recently said about them not decanonizing anything and what the producers and the director have said about them trying to canonize pretty much everything you've ever seen in the DC universe through the multiverse. So first things first, the Flash movie is doing a version of Flashpoint, but it's not the exact same story from the comics. The movie story is original, and they're just inspired by some elements from Flashpoint, like the altering of the timeline, the alternate versions of the characters. The Flash movie is sort of combining a multiverse movie like Spider-Man No Way Home and a time travel Flashpoint story. Like imagine the Marvel people combining the Loki series with all the time travel and the alternate versions of characters with Spider-Man No Way Home, which is different characters from other universes. So in the way that we've started to call the MCU the Marvel Cinematic Multiverse after the Loki series, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, Spider-Man No Way Home with these multiverse characters, and Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, the DC people, the Warner Brothers people, the directors have said that they're pretty much doing the same thing with the Flash movie. Like now they're referring to the DCEU as the larger DC multiverse. You may have heard them talking about this when they did their big DC fandom presentations this past year and then back in 2020, talking about the DC multiverse. So like Marvel just canonized the events of the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies and the Andrew Garfield Amazing Spider-Man movies to the MCU, DC will basically be doing that for Michael Keaton's Batman movies and the Flash movie, but they also posted a trailer back in 2020 where they included footage from the Christopher Reeve Superman movies, the classic Wonder Woman series, pretty much all the movies and the TV shows that DC has done from the last 40 years or more. So that's what I mean when they're starting to refer to things as the DC multiverse instead of just the straight-up DCEU. Up to this point, we've only thought of the DCEU as the movies based on the Zack Snyder versions of the characters, like the current Justice League roster and all their solo movies. That also included both of the Suicide Squad movies, like the new one as well, and the new John Cena Peacemaker series. So that's why you just have to think of it as the larger DC multiverse now, even though people will just continue to use the term MCU and DCEU just because that's become such shorthand for a way of describing the current crop of movies. I did a Flash movie trailer video after they released the last one at DC Fandom, but we learned that Ezra Miller's main Flash travels to the universe where Michael Keaton's Batman came from. Call it Earth 89, whatever you want, basically the Earth from the Tim Burton Batman movies. And there he encounters an alternate universe Barry Allen Flash and creates a lo-fi homemade version of a Flash suit with a lot of Red Death Easter eggs. Because zoom and enhance, you can see his Flash suit is just a scrap version of one of Michael Keaton Batman's old Batman suits. Like he literally just spray paints red over an old Keaton Batman suit. So I say Red Death Easter eggs because that's kind of the vibe here. Red Death was a Dragon Ball fusion style speedster created when a version of Batman uses the Speed Force to merge with a version of Barry Allen, and his costume was kind of like a combo Batman Flash mashup like this. There's also the low-key rumors that this alternate version of Barry Allen will wind up being one of the villains of the movie, because they also just confirmed that a version of Michael Shannon's Zod and Feora from Man of Steel are coming back for the Flash movie. They might be villains, maybe not, but it seems like they're in the movie just based on casting reports. I say they might not be villains because the whole beauty of Flashpoint is that some of the major villains are good in the alternate timeline and some of the heroes are villains. And the whole idea of Flashpoint is the Flash learning that he can't play God and use his abilities to change the timeline for selfish reasons. Michael Keaton's Batman has that speech in the trailer where he sounds like he's taking Flash to task about that. You change the past, you change the future. But the reports about them rebooting the DCEU are that they'll end the movie with a new main universe Justice League roster, with Supergirl, like this version of Supergirl, and Michael Keaton's Batman replacing Ben Affleck's Batman and Henry Cavill's Superman as the main versions you see in all the future crossover Justice League movies. It should go without saying that the new roster the next time they do a Justice League movie will also include characters like Shazam, but I'm mostly just talking about them swapping out characters in this video. So here's where I think there's a lot of confusion, because when you see people posting about how they're getting rid of Ben Affleck's Batman and Henry Cavill's Superman, I think that's a little exaggerated. People were worried that DC was just going to completely erase all the continuity of the Zack Snyder Justice League films and those spin-off movies. I think that the Warner Brothers and the DC people know how many people would just openly revolt if they saw something like that. Like if they actually tried to show up and say, no, this never happened. But I think for sure, yes, they are trying to change the main Justice League roster going forward. They'd have to do it eventually. Like, eventually some of these actors will say, okay, I'm done. I'm not going to do this anymore. Like clockwork, almost every 6 to 8 years, we always get a new Batman. If you've been around since back in the day, you've already seen many, many alternate versions of Superman and Batman. And right now, Ben Affleck has said he doesn't really want to do any more Batman, like he's not really interested in doing giant franchise movies anymore, so the Flash movie was kind of supposed to be his last appearance as the character no matter what, and they've already started working on like 10 different versions of Superman in the DC movies already. So Henry Cavill seemed like he was going to get a couple last hurrahs and then he'd move on eventually too. But the way they'll probably handle this from a multiverse continuity perspective, because they're trying to use the movie to canonize a bunch of other classic versions of the characters to the DCEU, is they'll just use the blanket broad multiverse explainer, just like hand wave, and say they're creating a multiverse version of the Justice League without having to totally erase Ben Affleck's Batman and Henry Cavill's Superman or any other characters in the future that they want to cycle in and out of Justice League rosters. If some of the majors like Batman, Superman, eventually Wonder Woman aren't going to stick around for forever, you do need to explain how to add other versions to the main team, because they're always going to want to have a version of Batman on the team, they're always going to want to have a version of Superman. Could you imagine them trying to do a Justice League movie without a version of Batman on the team? And Marvel just did a great job with Spider-Man No Way Home. So I'll say spoiler warning for Spider-Man No Way Home if you haven't seen that movie yet, because some of the twists it sounds like they're going to be using in the DC universe to explain what's going on with all these character swaps. Right now, Sony has a billion Spider-Man spin-off movies they're developing, like the Venom movies, the Morbius movies, Sinister Six solo movies, and they want Spider-Man in those as much as possible, in as many ways as possible. But Tom Holland, MCU Spider-Man, doesn't want to do a billion new Spider-Man movies. By bringing back Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man in Spider-Man No Way Home, they basically setting up the idea that eventually you will start seeing other multiverse versions of Spider-Man showing up in some of these other Sony movies. And it won't feel weird for all the filthy casuals that aren't like big comic book fans, because they already justified the logic through Spider-Man No Way Home. Like, oh, there are a bunch of other versions of these characters out there in the multiverse. Like Sony does a bunch of other movies and they bring Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man back for that, while you still have Tom Holland doing the MCU Spider-Man movies. So I think that's why the Flash movie will take a similar approach with the multiverse versions of all these Justice League characters. Like, everything is canon now, kind of, and it will give them the flexibility they need to mix and match teams in the future. So that down the road, if they really want to go crazy and do a Crisis on Infinite Earths movie, like a much bigger version than we saw in the DC TV Crisis on Infinite Earths, they can bring back Henry Cavill's Superman or bring back Henry Cavill as alternate versions of a different Superman in some movies, and it will all make sense. Same thing with Ben Affleck's Batman, if he wants to come back in 20 years as a different Batman Beyond version of Bruce Wayne, which is kind of what they're doing with Michael Keaton's Batman right now. That's why you probably heard Michael Keaton is going to be showing up in the Batgirl movie and other movies beyond that as sort of like a multiverse crossover Batman. So yes, they are probably going to cycle the Justice League roster with different versions of the characters. I think the thing people are getting wrong, though, is that they're not erasing the other versions of those characters like Henry Cavill's Superman and Ben Affleck's Batman. The whole reason why Robert Pattinson's Batman is set during a different universe is because Matt Reeves just didn't want to have to deal with all the other crossover continuity. Like, he just wanted to tell a Batman story and didn't want to have to worry about the other stuff. But long term, there's always the idea that eventually, if Robert Pattinson wanted to, and if Matt Reeves was open to it, they could also use him in a big multiverse crossover story. so never say never. You just have to imagine they're going to get way crazier with the way they use alternate versions of characters using tropes like the multiverse and time travel. Big reminder though, my Star Wars Book of Boba Fett Episode 2 video will post this Wednesday just like normal, and the DC Peacemaker HBO episodes will start in a couple weeks too. I will be doing episode videos for that, and that is connected to the DCEU. Everyone click here for my new Morbius trailer video and learn how that's connected to Spider-Man No Way Home and Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, and click here to learn how they changed the timelines of the Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield movies at the end of No Way Home. Thank you so much for watching, everyone stay safe, and Happy New Year!